If I were choosing a single pilot light jet to carry you to the next decade, these might be the two airplanes at the very top of the list. On one side is the Embraer Phenom 300EV, the newest evolution of aircraft that has dominated the light jet market for years. It is fast, packed with automation, and Embraer has made some significant changes aimed at reducing workload while improving the experience for everyone on board. On the other side is the Citation CJ4 Gen3, Cessna's newest version of the largest aircraft in the CJ family. It brings an entirely new Garmin cockpit, emergency auto land, auto throttles, increased range, and the experience of a Citation platform that has been flying for years. This is a much closer fight than it might first appear. The Phenom has the speed, the Citation has the published range advantage, both can be flown single pilot, both now offer emergency auto land, and both are trying to answer essentially the same question. How much capability can you put into a light jet before you really need to move into something bigger? Welcome to Elite Ace Aviation. I'm Chad, and on this channel we cover business jets, aircraft reviews, aviation news, pilot resources, and the technology changing the way we fly. If you enjoy this kind of aviation content, give the video a like, subscribe to Elite Ace Aviation, and turn on notifications because we have a lot more aircraft reviews and comparisons coming. Now let's get into it. There is a reason this comparison matters. The Phenom 300 and Citation CJ4 already occupy a very interesting part of the business jet market. They are small enough to remain practical for owner-operators and smaller flight departments, but they deliver the speed, altitude, capability, and cabin experience required for serious business travel. And neither manufacturer is standing still. Embraer announced the Phenom 300EV in July of 2026, with deliveries expected to begin in 2028. Textron announced the CJ4 Gen3 earlier, and after more than 880 hours of flight testing, the program is moving towards expected FAA certification this year. So unlike comparing a brand new aircraft against an older generation, these are two airplanes being developed for essentially the same era, and that makes the difference between them much more interesting. We'll start with the numbers everybody wants to know first: speed. Embraer says the Phenom 300EV can reach speeds up to Mach 0.80. This is an impressive number for a light jet and continues one of the Phenom 300 family's biggest selling points. The CJ4 Gen3 has a published maximum cruise speed of 451 knots and a maximum limit speed of Mach 0.77. So if your priority is simply getting there as quickly as possible, the Phenom still has the edge. But the Citation answers back with range. Textron publishes a maximum range of 2,165 nautical miles for the CJ4 Gen3, whereas Embraer publishes 2,055 nautical miles for the Phenom 300EV with NBAA IFR reserves. That gives the Citation the larger headline range number, but there is an important point here. Aircraft range figures are not always published using identical assumptions. Payload, reserve, cruise profile, winds, and alternate requirements can all change this result. So I would not look at those two numbers and assume the Citation will automatically fly exactly 110 nautical miles further on every comparable mission. What we can say is that both airplanes comfortably break the 2,000 nautical mile mark on their published figures, and the CJ4 Gen3 has clearly become much more competitive with the Phenom when it comes to range. Both aircraft also have a maximum operating altitude of 45,000 feet. The combination of altitude, speed, and range is really what makes this class so appealing. You are getting serious cross-country capability without moving into the size and operating structure of a mid-sized jet. Now this is where brochure numbers start becoming actual airplane ownership. The CJ4 Gen3 has a published maximum payload of 2,200 pounds, a useful load of 6,930 pounds, and a full fuel payload of 1,102 pounds. It also provides 77.1 cubic feet of baggage volume and up to 1,040 pounds of baggage capacity. That is a lot of luggage for an airplane in this category. Golf clubs, larger suitcases, equipment for a longer trip, or the kind of baggage that starts appearing when you put several people on an airplane can change the mission quickly. Embraer has already increased the Phenom 300EV's maximum zero fuel weight, adding approximately 430 pounds of payload capability compared to the previous aircraft. That is a meaningful improvement because the payload flexibility is often more important in the real world than another small increase in theoretical range. Nobody buys one of these airplanes to fly an empty cabin around with perfect weather and ideal winds. You buy it to put people and bags on board and actually go somewhere. And this is one of the areas where I would want to run the exact missions before choosing between them. If your normal trip is 4 or 5 people with a lot of baggage, look at that mission. If you regularly operate from a short runway on a hot summer afternoon, look at that mission. If you routinely fly at 1,700 to 1,800 nautical mile trips and want to avoid a fuel stop, also look at that mission. That's far more useful than choosing the airplane because one number on the brochure is slightly larger than the other. One of the great advantages of this category is that you do not necessarily have to give up smaller airport access to get jet performance. Textron publishes a takeoff field length of 3,410 feet for the CJ4 Gen3 and a landing distance of 2,940 feet under specified conditions. The Phenom 300 family has also built a reputation for strong runway performance, and the 300EV adds another interesting tool with auto brake. But this is another area where I would avoid declaring a winner based on one published distance. Field elevation, temperature, aircraft weight, wind, runway slope, surface conditions, and obstacle clearance can dramatically change what an airplane can actually do. If you're buying one of these aircraft because you regularly use a particular 4,000-foot runway, the only numbers that really matter are the numbers for that runway, at your operating weights, in the conditions you expect to encounter. Now, this might be the most fascinating part of the comparison. For years, cockpit technology was one of the areas where the Phenom and the CJ4 felt noticeably different. With the Gen 3, that gap has become much smaller. The Phenom 300EV uses Embraer's Garmin-based Prodigy Touch flight deck. It includes emergency auto land, auto throttle, auto brake, emergency descent mode, synthetic vision, runway and taxi situational awareness, and Embraer's runway overrun awareness and alerting system. The aircraft also introduces rudder-by-wire through Embraer's new electronic control architecture. There is a lot happening here, but the point is not simply to add more technology. The goal is to reduce the number of things the pilot has to manage manually, particularly during higher workload phases of flight. And in a jet capable of flying at 45,000 feet at Mach 0.80, workload matters. But now look at the Citation. The CJ4 Gen 3 moves away from the Collins ProLine 21 cockpit of the previous generation and introduces Garmin's G3000 Prime. This is a major change. The system features touchscreen interfaces, larger secondary displays, a more streamlined menu structure, integrated crew alerting, Garmin's GWX 8000 Storm Optics weather radar, synthetic vision, full regime auto throttles, and emergency auto land. The CJ4 Gen 3 also includes runway occupancy awareness and Garmin's advanced 3D safe taxi capability. So the cockpit comparison is no longer simply modern Garmin technology versus an older established avionics suite. Both manufacturers are now leaning heavily into automation, situational awareness, and reducing pilot workload. The difference is in how each aircraft integrates those tools. The Phenom adds features such as auto brake, rudder-by-wire, and ROAS. The Citation counters with the latest G3000 Prime architecture and carries it into a platform that a huge number of Citation pilots already know. And honestly, this part of the comparison could matter just as much as speed or range. Before we move into the cabins, I want to take a second to tell you about our Elite Ace Aviation store. We've been adding new aviation shirts and designs for pilots, aviation professionals, and anyone who just loves being around airplanes. So if you want to support Elite Ace Aviation and pick up some aviation gear at the same time, check out the store through the link in the description below. Your support helps us continue producing aircraft comparisons, reviews, and aviation content like this. You'll also be able to find the full written comparison of the Phenom 300EV and Citation CJ4 Gen 3 on EliteAceAviation.com. Let's get back into the airplanes. Neither one of these aircraft is pretending to be a mid-sized jet. You are not getting a stand-up cabin, and there are physical limits to what can be done inside of an airplane of this size. But both manufacturers have become very good at making those dimensions work. The Phenom has always benefited from its large windows, which can make the cabin feel brighter and more open than numbers alone would suggest. On the 300EV, Embraer is also adding an odorless vacuum lavatory, improved temperature control, air ionization, and a redesigned refreshment center that can accommodate a hot beverage machine. The aircraft also retains a maximum cabin altitude of 6,600 feet, something that becomes increasingly relevant as trips get longer. Connectivity is becoming a bigger part of the package, with Gogo Galileo low Earth orbit connectivity and Starlink planned as an aftermarket option. The CJ4 Gen 3 takes a somewhat different approach. Its cabin is 57 inches high and 58 inches wide and just over 17 feet long. Textron offers multiple interior configurations, including different seating arrangements and an optional couch, which gives some buyers flexibility depending on how they expect to use the airplane. The Gen 3 also gets updated interior choices and the Premier Collection, which can add features such as upgraded materials, quartz countertops, seat quilting, and a vanity with a sink. And this is where personal preference starts playing a bigger role. Some passengers are going to prefer the bright, large window-filled Phenom. Others may prefer the Citation's cabin layout, baggage capability, or interior customization. At this price point, that does matter. You should actually sit in both airplanes because two cabins can look very similar on a specification sheet and feel completely different once the door closes. One thing that is interesting about both of these aircraft is that neither manufacturer has thrown away a successful basic formula. The CJ4 Gen3 continues with the Williams International FJ44 4A engines producing 3,621 pounds of thrust each. Textron is building the Gen 3 around a CJ4 platform that has now reached the 500 aircraft mark across the series. That means the airplane underneath all of the new cockpit technology comes from a very mature program. The Phenom 300EV follows a very similar philosophy. Embraer is not replacing the Phenom 300 with some completely unfamiliar design. It is continuing to evolve an aircraft family that has been the best-selling light jet for 14 consecutive years. Both companies are starting with airplanes that already work extremely well. What we're really seeing now is just how far they can push those platforms. Once you've moved beyond the aircraft itself, the decision becomes more personal. Cessna has an enormous installed base and long-standing support infrastructure around the Citation family. There are pilots, mechanics, training programs, service centers, and flight departments all around the world with extensive Citation experience. For an operator already flying a Citation, staying within the ecosystem can have a real value. Embraer has built a substantial support network of its own, and the success of the Phenom series means there is no longer the new kid trying to establish itself in the light jet market. There are a lot of Phenoms flying, and there is now mature ownership and operator community around the airplane. So I don't think this decision comes down to one company having support and the other not having it. The better question is which network works best where you operate, who is going to maintain your airplane, where do you plan to train, and whether you already have experience with one of the two brands. Those things may never appear in a performance chart, but they can have a major impact on what it's actually like to own the airplane. So which one wins? And this is where things get difficult, because unlike the comparison with the CJ4 Gen 2, I don't think the Phenom simply walks away with this one. The CJ4 Gen 3 changes the equation. It now has Garmin G3000 Prime, full regime auto throttles, emergency auto lens, strong published range, excellent baggage capability, and a platform with hundreds of aircrafts behind it. And the Phenom 300EV counters with more speed, improved payload capability, a highly automated cockpit, and a cabin that remains one of the strongest in the light jet category. If maximum speed is near the top of your list, I would lean towards the Phenom. If baggage capability and the Citation ecosystem matter more, the CJ4 becomes extremely difficult to dismiss. And that may actually be the biggest takeaway from this comparison. The competition between these two aircraft is pushing the light jet category into territory that used to belong to much larger and more expensive airplanes. If I had to choose one based on what we know today, I would give the Phenom 300EV a very slight edge. Not because it dominates the Citation, it doesn't. I would choose it because taken as a whole, the Phenom 300EV feels like the slightly more complete package. And once both airplanes are in customer hands and we have real operating data from each, the comparison is going to become even more interesting. So now I want to hear from you. If the money was yours and you were ordering one of these airplanes, which one are you taking, the Phenom 300EV or the Citation CJ4 Gen 3? Let me know in the comments below and tell me why. You can find the full written comparison at EliteAceAviation.com, and I'll put the link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to Elite Ace Aviation, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming aviation reviews, aviation news, and head-to-head comparisons. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.